Well, we are back with We Are What We Hated, part like 717, I think now. I can't believe you came back. I got to get an unlisted number. But Larry, the contractor guy, is with us to talk more about this situation, which, as much as it's in the past, in the time that we don't talk, Larry, it's kind of like it just seems to be resurrected with a lot of things that go on.
Yeah.
I just got done with doing like 700 hours with Colvin. You know how that goes.
Yeah.
And that's my fault, basically. But, and we were talking about the Nazis in that, too, and what they had going.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that, and I wanted to clarify this, that they had bombers that were capable of flying from the Norwegian southwest coast and could drop a load. That didn't come out right. In New York. And I challenge them on that because I'm like, well, why weren't they picked up by any air defenses? Because you had Comac, Long Island, which was kind of on the eastern end, and they had stuff there to detect. But he goes, they stopped about 12 miles out, basically saying, okay, we can do this. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, they were testing it out. They also had, they were well into developing an ICBM that they thought they could hit New York with.
Yeah,
and,
yeah, that would have changed a lot of things.
It sure would.
But I'm wondering how much that was, la-di-la-di, you know what I mean? And how much of it were true.
Mm-hmm.
Because, again, they dropped those VJ bombs. Was that what they were called? What were they called? The drones that they were dropping in London?
The buzz bombs? Yeah, they had the V1 and the V2.
Yeah.
The V1 was the precursor of a cruise missile. It was an early cruise missile, a very crude cruise missile, but it worked. And then they had like a jet strapped onto this thing, and they would just fire it off, and it would cruise for a certain amount of time, and then drop out of the sky and blast what was ever under it. And then they had the V2, which was the forerunner of the modern ICBM. And it was basically a Scud missile. That's what Saddam Hussein was using, was old Nazi technology when he was using the Scud missiles. He was way behind the times, but he really only just wanted to blast Israel to mess up the United States little coalition there. So he didn't really care as long as he got a few rounds in on Israel.
I just thought I'd do this. I get these weird feelings, and I'm going to open up with a little bit of a what do you call it in the beginning? Is it a benediction? I'm not so sure. Maybe that's when you go out. But it's from Steinbeck, whom I love so much. I just felt led to share this with you. One of my favorite quotes.
Yeah, I like Steinbeck.
He has written, "It has always seemed strange to me, the things we admire in men, kindness and generosity, openness, honesty, understanding and feeling, are the concomitants of failure in our system. And those traits we detest, sharpness, greed, acquisitiveness, meanness, egotism, and self-interest, are the traits of success. And while men admire the quality of the first, they love the produce of the second." Amen.
Yeah.
There begins the church at John Steinbeck. Hallelujah.
Yeah.
So at any rate, and that's what we're talking about too, because all we're dealing with and what all of us have lived through is the fallout from what the masters of the universe have created.
Exactly.
And I don't say that, I say that tongue-in-cheekly, but it's true. I mean, what we're talking about are the elites decide to get something done, and we, the little ants, just get squashed. And as we were talking about the rockets, it even makes me think more that the war was scripted. Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, how can Germany not just blow the UK out of the water?
Right.
How can that not happen in two wars, especially the second, if they're throwing buzz bombs over, which I'm not so sure. I mean, I don't think I want to live in a neighborhood where they're dropping in. But that did not take England down to its knees, nor was I think it intended to do. So I don't know. But
I think it was a matter of time before they did take England down. But they were stopped in two ways. One, the RAF had the Spitfire, which was an excellent fighter aircraft, and it did an awful lot of damage to the German Air Force. And then they also had the English Navy was still the largest and most powerful Navy in the world at that time, and it was going to be hard for them to get across that channel. But in the long run, Hitler really didn't want to attack England. He really didn't. He wanted to make an alliance with England, and that was really why Rudolf Hess went over. We talked a lot about Hess, and kind of hard to figure it out, and I started thinking about that, and I started looking at some of the material I've been reading. Jim Marrs has a long section in his book, The Rise of the Fourth Reich, about Hess, and I was planning to read that today if we had time. I was going to talk about Skorzeny.
Right.
If you want, I can talk about Hess at this point.
Well, I would say yes, but only as it doesn't, sidetrack you from what we were doing.
No, it was just something. It's an important chapter in the whole Nazi saga, and we can talk about that now, or we can talk about what I was going to do first.
Well, you're still going to do what you were going to do, right?
Yeah.
All right, why don't you hit this first, and we'll go into it. Sure.
All right. I'll start this off with a quote from Peter Levenda again in Unholy Alliance. He says, "The world is still in the grip of World War II. In fact, it is still in the grip of World War I. With the collapse of Russian communism, the map of Eastern Europe is slowly coalescing into the old boundaries. What used to be Yugoslavia has now reverted into a melange of independent republics that despise each other and still cling to a pre-World War II mindset. Croatia is beset with rumors of the old anti-Semitic Ustashi coming back to power as old Nazis are rehabilitated for new government posts. Israel, a creature of World War I, is still not at peace. The Nazis, who orchestrated a continual campaign of warfare and terror after World War II from bases in Egypt, Syria, and Europe, have given way to Muslim fundamentalists who have become, if anything, more racist and more superstitious in regard to the Jews than the Nazis could have ever hoped for. The Nazis, who had no love for the Muslims, are now sitting back and hoping that the Arabs and the Jews all finish each other off." I think that's an important point. He didn't elaborate too much on it, but I really believe that what's happening right now is that the New World Order, if you will, is polarizing both sides of that conflict, and the Israeli right wing, represented by the Likud party and Netanyahu, along with certain elements of the Tea Party in this country and other elements, are pumping up war. They're pretty much forced into it by the opposite side of the Arab Muslims, and especially the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, all their enemies over there. It's just something that's going to lead, I really believe, to World War III. Next thing I was going to read is, in connection with that, is an essay by a man named Serge Trifkovic, who wrote a book called The Sword of the Prophet, A Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam. And it starts off, one of the good things one can truthfully say about Islam is that there has never been any love lost between Muslims and Marxists. Sadly, the opposite end of the totalitarian political spectrum is quite another matter. SS Chief Heinrich Himmler was known to remark that he regretted that Germany had adopted Christianity rather than warlike Islam as its religion, and there's a disturbing amount of twisted but very real logic in his remark. Beyond the obvious dislike of a certain other religion, we have the plain fact that both Nazism and Islam both openly aim at world conquest. Both demand the total subordination of the free will of the individual. The very word Islam means submission in Arabic. Both are explicitly anti-nationalist and believe in the liquidation of the nation-state in favor of a higher community. In Islam, the Ummah, or community of all believers, and in Nazism, the Herrenvolk, or master race. Both believe in undemocratic leadership by a privileged knower of an absolute, eternal, and ultimately mystical truth, the Caliph or Führer, respectively. To be fair, in strict Nazism, Arabs are racial Semites and thus subhumans. But as Robert Locke has written, the Nazis did not really believe in their racial mythology when they found it inconvenient, and they exploited their commonalities with Islam for all they were worth. If the British Army had not stopped Rommel in the sands of El Alamein in 1942, preventing him from conquering the Middle East, the consequences for world history might have been dramatic. What did happen was quite ugly enough. The Nazis began by attempting to exploit Arab resentment of the British and French colonial rule that they were under during the 1930s. Colonial rule, which in light of the subsequent bloody and tyrannical history of the region, is hard to condemn today as worse than a likely alternative. They promised the Arabs liberation from the French and British, a promise which the naive Arabs, not grasping the character of a Nazi regime, that would have likely reduced them to slaves, in its own empire, took at face value. This gave rise to Arab anti-Semitism that he didn't say that, but I was saying that. He said Hitler himself was even given an Arabic name, Abu Ali, but Hitler's Germany went further and sensed the demonic potentialities inherent in the mythology, reliably emotionally satisfying the persons crazed with resentment of radical anti-Semitism. It made a concerted and remarkable successful effort to plant modern anti-Semitism in the Arab world. The founding of Israel helped further this project, as Bernard Lewis has written. The struggle for Palestine greatly facilitated the acceptance of the anti-Semitic interpretation of history and led some to attribute all evil in the Middle East and indeed in the world to secret Jewish plots. The Nazis managed to recruit some Muslims directly. Several Muslim SS divisions were raised, and we've talked about in previous episodes. This was only taking the first step in Heinrich Himmler's planned grand alliance between Nazi Germany and the Islamic world. One of his closest aides, Obergruppenführer Gottlob Berger, boasted that a link is created between Islam and National Socialism on an open, honest basis. It will be directed in terms of blood and race from the north, and in the ideological spiritual sphere from the east. What an image. A Nazi-Muslim alliance to conquer the world. Goes on to talk about modern-day Egypt and modern-day Middle East and the anti-Semitism in that area of the world. The most prominent and influential daily newspaper in the Arab world is Al-Ahram, a semi-official organ of the Egyptian government. In June 2001, it carried an op-ed article, "What exactly did the Jews want?" And the answer was worthy of the Nazi newspaper, the Völkisch Beobachter, 6 decades early. The Jews, this quote, "The Jews share boundless hatred of the Gentiles. They kill women and children and sow destruction. Israel is today populated by people who are not descendants of the children of Israel, but rather a mixture of slaves, Aryans, and remnants of the Khazars. And they are not Semites. In other words, people without an identity, whose only purpose is blackmail, theft, and control over property and land with the assistance of the Western countries." The second most influential Egyptian daily is Al-Akhbar, which went a step farther on April 18, 2001. Our thanks go to the late Hitler, who wrought in advance the vengeance of the Palestinians upon the most despicable villains on the face of the earth. However, we rebuke Hitler for the fact that the vengeance was insufficient. It's hard to imagine hatred more vitriolic than that which reproaches the Nazis for not completing the final solution more thoroughly. What is remarkable is not that such sentiments exist, but that they are freely circulated in the mainstream media and internalized by the opinion-making elite throughout the Muslim world. In the same league, we find the claim that the Holocaust, in fact, never happened and that the Jews and Israelis are the real Nazis is regularly made. The Jewish Nazi theme is a favorite of Arab caricaturists, some of whom use the swastika interchangeably with the Star of David or juxtapose them. Graphic depiction of the Jews appears to have been lifted directly from the pages of the notorious old Nazi newspaper Der Stürmer, or the Stormtrooper. It kind of gives you an idea that this conflict is not going to be resolved anytime soon by peaceful means.
But aren't we hearing, Larry? I mean, everything that you've read has struck me as being just over-the-top propaganda from one about the other. Mm-hmm. And I mean, and that's deliberate, and that's meant to keep everybody irritated and agitated. You know, like I said, applying the old sandpaper to a cat's behind.
Yeah.
Then throwing them into a box and wondering why they fight. And of course, we understand that in Scripture it was predicted that as we said before in Genesis, you know, that this the seed of Hagar would be a great nation, but would be a little bit hard to get along with. Excuse me. But, you know, I have to not laugh, but one of the things that makes that come true is the continual instigation by the West.
Exactly.
Have the Middle Eastern people, whatever they are, I don't care if they're Islamic or Christian or whatever, have never been left alone. The West always has found some reason for the last, 10 millennia to get in there and do something. So, you know, what do you expect?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Well, it's deliberate, and I think it's just like Lavinda said, and there's a lot of evidence pointing to it. They want to exaggerate this hatred, and they want these two sides to wipe each other out. And of course, that would be the final solution for the Jews, the way they see it. And they'd also get the Arabs out of the way too, because they want the oil in that area of the world, and they're tired of dealing with the problems that the Arabs present for them in that regard. And plus, with Aryan racial theories, they consider the the Arabs and any Semitic people to be inferiors, that they're not Aryans, and as a result, they're considered to be a trash race to those people.
And by the way, today, this Sunday, what is it, June 5th?
Yes, sir.
They're having their annual pro-Israeli parade in Manhattan.
Uh-huh.
And no big deal. I mean, I really never realized it was going on. I just found out about it today. It's been going on for I don't know how long. And, of course, there's always tensions there and such. But I had to laugh because, really, I mean, I lived in a neighborhood and in a town that was multicultural before the word ever became fashionable. And in the 90s, right about when I left, I mean, you had clearly Middle Eastern people dressed in their mufti living next to Jews, and I don't know, nobody got all upset about anything. And there was really no reason for people to hate each other, when they're not being stirred up for it and being given a steady diet of propaganda by those who wish to use them for their own aims. And that's really what's happened in the Middle East. It's not that there's such a great record about how the Arabs have treated the Jews, but there was a time when, even though the Jews were persecuted to an extent, and they were treated as inferiors by the Arabs and the Muslims, at least they were allowed to live without having to worry about, getting a bullet through their head, just for walking down the street, just for the simple fact that they're Jews. There weren't people running around pumping up pogroms against them, if you like. Well, but once the Nazis got that started, and especially al-Husseini, who used it, he wanted to be the caliph of the of the Arab world, and he saw in anti-Semitism, which I'm sure he thoroughly believed in, he was influenced by the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was, I believe, a Rosicrucian doctrine, Rosicrucian document. It's a forgery of that was foisted off on Europe in the late 1800s. There's a long history on that thing. I was going to talk about that briefly. I've got another quote here from a man named Matthias Kunzel, who is a professor in Germany. He's a Jewish professor in Germany, and he studied anti-Semitism for obvious reasons. And he writes, shortly after the liberation of Auschwitz and the recognition that most of European Jews had been too powerless to prevent their murder, the Islamists branded Jews as the true world ruling power. The Nazi belief in a worldwide Jewish conspiracy had not only survived the collapse of the Hitler regime, but was eagerly adopted in 1947 in an Arabic world where the Muslim Brotherhood had by now succeeded in mustering 1 million supporters. Tens of thousands of Arab copies of one of the most repugnant anti-Jewish publications, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, were published in the following decades by two well-known former members of the Muslim Brotherhood, Gamal Abdel Nasser and Anwar al-Sadat. Hundreds of thousands of copies of the essay by Sayyid Qutb, Our Struggle with the Jews, written in 1950, were distributed throughout the Muslim world in the aftermath of the 1967 Six-Day War. The new impact of the Nazi-like conspiracy theories becomes particularly obvious if we take a look at the charter of the Muslim Brotherhood of Palestine, which calls itself Hamas. This charter, created in 1988, represents one of the most important Islamist programs of today. Here, Hamas pointedly makes use of the anti-Semitic rhetoric of the Mufti of Jerusalem,
which he in turn had adopted from the Nazis. The Brotherhood of Palestine defines itself as a universal movement whose jihad was the spearhead and the avant-garde in their struggle against world Zionism. He also quotes another scholar of anti-Semitism, a man named Yehuda Bauer. The language of Islamism is plainly and clearly a genocidal one. They are striving for a repetition of the mass murder of the Jews. That's written down black on white, and it is. It's clear this is their goal. It would be funny if it wasn't so sad every time you see one of these conferences and one of these conferences where they want to talk about the peace process over there and how we're going to have peace. And I can't not name a recent American president who hasn't had some kind of a overture to the Arab-Israeli groups over there. You know, everybody wants to get them together and make peace. They're not going to have peace. There's no desire on the part of the Arabs to. They want to push them into the sea. It's just that simple. Yes, I'm sure there are plenty of Muslims over in that area of the world who just want to live their lives without, being involved in violence and bloodshed. But it doesn't take that many. If 10%, which is what they always reckon is the number of radical Islamic people, if it's only 10%, then that's plenty enough to keep that conflict going. And I think that's going to result in the nations of the world lining up in the first phase of major war. I think there's going to be a third world war, and I think eventually Russia and China will get involved in it. I think there's going to be an Arab confederation over there, and I think the Muslim Brotherhood is working on that right now. They're almost about to take power in Egypt. They've been working on that for over 80 years. They've been in and out of power, but this time I think they'll stay for a while.
But again, I think that everything is orchestrated to a certain end. Mm-hmm. And if everyone were left alone, do you think they could live peaceably? I'm guessing they could.
Yes.
Now, you know that the dropping in of Israel in 1948, I don't know, however it was embraced by Jewish people, whatever that means, certainly was looked at by Christians as some kind of a prophecy realized. And, I don't know how you feel about it, but I think that it was definitely a scam because, as far as I understand, Jehovah brought the tribes back to their land. That had already been fulfilled, but the tribes blew it. Yeah. All right?
I'm not really sure on that one, but I do know one thing, that there was a considerable element within the Jewish community, and that's kind of a BS term, but it's the best I can come up with. I'd say the Jewish community, and by that I mean certain schools of thought and certain influential rabbis who never believed that Zionism was right and never believed that the Jews should do that. And of course, though, World War II and the Nazi persecution in Europe forced many people to try to find a place where they would not be persecuted. I mean, when you had 6 million people being killed and gassed and the whole Holocaust thing going on, that you had quite an incentive for people to want to run somewhere else, and Zionism was right there. The Zionists were right there to herd them on into Israel.
Yeah,
and I think it's part of the whole idea of getting rid of them once and for all, because you're concentrating them in one small area. And I know that may sound like a conspiracy theory to people, and I'm not hoping for that to happen. I'm not hoping, for the Jews to be wiped out, or the Arabs either, for that matter. But I think that's just, it's kind of like it's just inevitable.
But I'm asking you now, its inevitability, to me, is due to the fact that Satan has a leash until a certain time.
Right.
And the things that do occur are being obviously fulfilled, whether he realizes it or not.
Right.
And so my point is, now remember, there's a very strange period here, too, coming from the 19th century into the beginning of the 20th century, where, again, the West has all kinds of ideas about what should happen in the Middle East. Hence, you got what? The Sykes-Picot Agreement, you have the McMahon Pledge, and you have the Balfour Declaration. Mm-hmm. Even before and during World War I, there was an inducement coming out of England, and you could say British Zionists, I guess that's okay, to have them come down. But it's like, what are you doing? All right? So I'm not going to say it's right or wrong, but there was this inducement rubber stamp by the British government to say, hey, yeah, go ahead on down. So prior to World War II, there was this urging of Jews to inhabit whatever land they could at that time.
Right, right. Yeah, Balfour was a man who invented a smokeless gunpowder, a new form of gunpowder, and it greatly enhanced the British military's artillery
capabilities.
Accuracy and capability, and as a result, he asked for the British government to help with. He wanted to be able to move the Jews into Palestine, and they granted him that. That's an awful complex subject. I'm not really prepared to go into it much, but I've got something else here along the same lines that I'd like to talk about.
You're moving me away from this. Very good, Larry. You are a salesman.
The only reason is I swear I won't. The only reason is I like to be prepared with some text and do it in a more formal way, because otherwise it's just me giving opinions, and I don't think people are tuning in to hear Larry the contractor guy spout his opinions.
Well, I give mine, and they don't care about them either. All right, but before you think I'm going to ambush you or go someplace crazy, I'm just going to say this. What I find interesting about this whole Israeli thing is, one, I believe that the covenant was fulfilled by the Lord in the Old Testament, and what's happening now is something that was foretold to happen because, again, Satan's at work. And I'm not calling Jews Satanists, nothing like that. No.
Yeah.
However, I also find it interesting that there is nothing said in Revelation about a homeland. We do know that 144,000 are marked. They do know that they are the remnant of the tribes, but it may very well be that they are martyred as well.
I tell you what we really ought to do is just do a show about this particular topic. This, narrow it down to that, and the history of Zionism and what it's all about. And there's the whole area of the Bible in the Old Testament where it talks about the king of the south and the king of the north, and the end times, and the king of the south, which at any rate
Go.
Yeah, in the Old Testament, in Daniel, it talks about the king of the south and the king of the north, and a conflict involving the nations in that region, and it names Persia and Egypt. And of course, Persia was the old name for Iran, and several other, what are now Muslim countries in North Africa and the Middle East, and going against people from the north. It's a complex, issue, and I'm not really prepared to get into all that right now. But I definitely see in what is going on in contemporary politics in that region of the world, the build-up to a third world war, and I don't think that's any kind of an original thought with me.
Oh, no.
But I see it coming.
And I think we both agree. No matter what's going on with what's been created, it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I got a little problem with Christians believing that this was an answer, a fulfillment of prophecy, because I think that was already done. However, we have to understand also that Jerusalem, as you have mentioned before, is the prize. And I don't think that that Christ will allow Satan to sit upon a throne over the world in Jerusalem. Without trying to get into too much, I would say that kind of would be a signal to me also that he's coming back.
Right. Well, in it talks about the Antichrist, the abomination of desolations, which is where he goes into the temple, which is rebuilt. And I'm not sure how that's going to come about, but the temple is rebuilt, and he goes in and proclaims himself to be God. And this is called the abomination of desolation.
Right.
And the whole world, apparently the whole world's going to see this. Well, back in ancient times, I guess people couldn't understand how that could happen, but now with satellite communications, it could easily happen.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it gets to be a nettlesome problem going all through this, and glibly speaking about it in 5 to 10 minutes is not going to take care of the situation.
Right.
And again, I think a lot, and this is going to be an isolated comment, so you need not address it because I know we have to go certain places. But I wonder sometimes, I mean, with this unfortunate situation, and I'm calling it unfortunate, with Harold Camping, whom I listened to for many years back in the 80s.
Yeah.
And just could not understand. And where I'm going with this is that there are many things that have to be fulfilled.
Yeah.
And if we're dealing with a taking away, because the word rapture is not in Scripture, if we're dealing with a taking away, which we all believe will happen, that's got to be at a certain time, and the events leading to that are not here yet.
Right.
And if it is a post-trib thing, if it is when we meet the Lord in the sky, well, then we know it's got to be after the trib, and the trib certainly is not what we've seen. I mean,
well, there's the three camps within evangelical Christianity, and I guess I would have to put myself under that category, although I don't really like that term that much. But it's pre-millennial, mid-tribulation, and
post. Yeah.
And post, pre-tribulation, I should say, mid-tribulation and post.
Post, yeah.
And I was raised to believe in the rapture, that prior to the tribulation, that the Christians, those who were born again Christians, would be raised in the air, and that whole scenario. I mean, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Maybe our audience doesn't, but I guess I could go into more explanation some other time. But as I've gotten older and I've looked around at the events, and I was influenced somewhat by some of your shows. And
gee, are you in trouble?
Yeah.
All right.
I've got to go get a new inspiration.
Yeah, stop right there.
Go downtown and buy a new inspiration.
That's it. Got to believe in someone's.
But anyway, no, I've begun to believe that it looks more likely to me, and I can't really go into Scripture to back up what I'm saying. But I've just thought that whole scenario, I do know, was created by some people in England.
A Scottish woman, I think.
Yeah, a Scottish lady.
McDonald, I think her name was. Yeah.
Yeah, that it was. I'm not sure what the motivation behind it was, but it was so widely preached and spread throughout the Christian West that an awful lot of people believe that, and I just I'm having a real problem believing in that. I believe that Christians are going to have to suffer through the tribulation.
Well,
maybe not the entire time, but that they are going to suffer, and I believe that God will bring us through. But it's like you were saying recently, that old saying. It's a lot of these people. It's all crown, no cross.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at the disciples of Christ, the people that walked with him, talked with him, ate with him, people that loved him and listened to him and studied him on a regular basis every day of their lives while they were with him, many of them were persecuted and horribly murdered by opponents of Jesus Christ.
I'm guessing all the apostles, none of them died in their sleep.
I don't think so.
No.
I don't think any of them did. I know that Peter was brutally murdered. All of them, that I can think of, they were martyred.
Yep.
So I mean, these are people that were. I mean, Jesus knew them intimately. They were his closest
right.
Disciples, and those people, they suffered for the cross. They suffered for their belief in Christ. So why is it? And I mean, you think about it. We're talking about this whole thing with Muslims and Jews. They don't like Christians any better. The radical ones don't like Christians any better than they like Jews. And over in Africa, in the Sudan, the black Christians in the south of that country are often persecuted, murdered, and many of them are taken into slavery and treated in the most brutal forms of whatever. I'm just going to grasping for words here, but they're treated in a brutal fashion and made slaves. So what makes us here in America think that we're going to skip out of all that and that everything's just going to be hunky dory and it's all crown, no cross.
Well,
and I don't think that's the way things are going to go down.
No, the prosperity doctrine that I first encountered back in the 80s never made any sense to me. And it says, well, it picks out all of the scriptures, anything you wish, da-da-da-da. Look, that's not how it goes.
Exactly.
And I think, well, without getting anything any thorough about that, but, we'd all be fools if we had a multiple choice questionnaire before us and saying, how would you like to be taken away? Before the trib, in the middle of the trib, or after the trib? Well, we would check, of course, before the trib. Mm-hmm. However, you wish for the best, you prepare for the worst. Mm-hmm. And let's face it, there's scriptures that say that many will be beheaded in my name. Mm-hmm. Well, how does that happen, folks, if you're not here?
Right.
And I'm sorry to say, no, it's a very unpleasant situation. But you think back to the slaughters of Christians in the Colosseum and such. I mean, tying their arms, one each to a runaway horse. I mean, and I'll tell you what. I mean, and Sandhu and I have done stuff on this, and I think we're going to do something else on this.
Right.
But I mean, what do I hope? I hope that the Lord can do anything. I mean, if you can at all possibly mute the pain, it's only a twinkling of an eye. But that's easy for us to say, isn't it? However, I'm just hoping for that. That's all I can say. I don't know how you stand there and get mauled by a lion. I'm not sure. But, he promised, and I'm believing on it. If we're faced with it, well, we have something to cling on to as far as what we're promised. If we don't, consider yourself very fortunate. But
I just think that in the future, with the nature of the enemy that we face, that many Christians and Jews will be slaughtered. I mean, it's just that simple. And I don't wish that, but that's the way it looks to me.
Larry, I would say that anybody who is devout about their faith, whether it be Christianity, Judaism, whether it's Islam or whatever, I mean, the idea is that there has to be a vacating of religion. Religion now becomes the state because the state has been rejoined as your spiritual head is also your political head. Mm-hmm. And that's what I take it as far as the end times. And that's a counterfeit of the days when divine law and Jehovah were both the political and the spiritual headship.
Right.
Now you're going to get a counterfeit, which is nothing new because what does Satan do? He counterfeits whatever is.
Exactly.
Right. And then whoever that should be, whatever that should be, will set itself up as, okay, get this now, folks. I am your political head. I am your spiritual head. Fade the Christianity thing. Fade the Judaism thing. We're not doing that anymore. Forget Islam, Confucianism, Buddhism. It ain't happening. Mm-hmm. So I would think anybody who wants to cling to whatever they consider the true religion is going to pay. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we...
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
no doubt. I mean, this new form of emperor worship, which is basically what I think it will be, a revived Roman Empire.
Yep. Yep.
And it will be like emperor worship, and that's what got the Christians.
That's right.
Because they would not worship the emperor as God.
Did you ever see Chris Pinto's 2 installments of I think Megiddo, the March to Armageddon?
No, but I remember you speaking to him on your show, and I found him very interesting, very articulate.
Oh, and he did a great job. To me, that'll always be the best he's done. I mean, mm-hmm. But the way he makes it look. I mean, I think about the one horn coming out of the 10, mm-hmm. and that all looks like what we're talking about.
Exactly.
And I know we've gone very far afield. I understand it. Thanks for taking that little side street, but
oh no, It's pertinent
It
to what
really
we're
is.
talking about. It's just my only problem was that I like to be prepared, and have something to read and kind of get my thoughts lined up, and I wasn't prepared for that, but it's fine.
And, of course, my job is to make everybody feel unprepared. So we all lead each other around in blindness. But the thing I always found was rich, and I'll leave it right here as a teaser.
Okay.
But the story about the 10 horns, and that an 11th would rise up from the 10, is that correct?
Well, I think that it's like the little horn. They talk about the little horn rising up.
Well, it was interesting, wasn't it? Was it not? I mean, and Pinto brought this out, and he showed, and he talked about that scripturally, and he also showed the Club of Rome's layout of the world into 10 unions.
Exactly.
Now, they did that in the late 60s, early 70s, and so now we're looking at, and we don't hear much about it. I think it's kind of interesting. We don't hear about the progress of the unions, the African Union and the North American Union. But I always thought that made sense in that an intermediate step between, like as you said, an emperor was the loss of sovereignty of all nations, their amalgamation into unions, and that there would be 10 of them.
Right.
And then from that, now that you guys are all into unions, now you're going to get the emperor.
Right.
And I know it's very facile to state, and we're doing this for brevity, but that's making a lot of sense to me.
It does me too. I think the Bible points to that in Daniel when it talks about the world empires. Daniel goes through those world empires in interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dream.
Yeah.
Babylon, conquered by Persia, and then that conquered by the Greeks, and then that conquered by the Roman Empire, and then the Roman Empire having a long period where it didn't exist in its previous form as an empire, but in fact it did in the Roman Catholic Church. And then eventually the revival of the Roman Empire, where it became its previous form, where it was both political, economic, and religious,
Yeah.
and an oligarchy that ran it, and an emperor.
Just thinking back, you allowed me to read something from that book I had about Rome and about Constantine's supposed conversion, which was,
yeah.
I mean, when you look at a religion, why would you allow Christianity to take the brand of a state religion, Romanism? Wow, what is that about? So I mean, that whole thing also, I think, was something that was politically expedient. And created, I think you could say, a state church, which was probably not what the first century or so Christians were interested in.
Right.
I just...
Oh, no, not at all.
No, it doesn't make sense.
In fact, many of them resisted it, but, it eventually, they kind of got drowned out. The best thing in the world that you can do to solidify your rule would be to appear to be the leader of a religion. And have everybody, underneath that religion. That's all it is, and that's what fascism does. Fascism is a merger of the corporate interest, the state, and religious interest. And if you look at it, all the fascist states, the main ones that existed in Europe in the 1930s and 40s, the Vatican was part and parcel of the governments, especially in Spain and obviously in Italy and in Germany as well.
Agreed, and I have to laugh because I mentioned this before that the Today Show on NBC visited once again Vatican City.
Right.
And one of the things that Matt Lauer said, I believe he said it is the most powerful nation state in the world. And I'm like, thank you. Is anybody listening to that?
Yeah. Well, when you have a billion adherents, I mean, there are a billion people within the Roman Catholic Church.
But remember, and here's a duality that is played very well by them. Are we talking about the Vatican as a spiritual instrument, or are we talking about the nation state?
Exactly.
And that gets lost in the sauce in all this kind of discussion very easily. And it's like, no, they're a political entity, and don't think they aren't. And I always had to laugh because it's like when they had a seat in the UN, I'm like, well, they're probably just a chaplain for the UN. No, they're not. They are a nation state, and they're there.
Right.
So, and of course, I go back and forth about this, but it would seem to me that the Society of Jesus, which is a very, very efficient, intelligent network, grabbed hold of the Vatican right around 1820s when the Treaty of Verona was signed. Mm-hmm. And from that point on, it was the Jesuit show.
Right.
So, I mean, and folks, I mean, yeah, the religion part, I try to compartmentate to one side. And let's talk about the geopolitical element also. That's always glossed over and forgotten about because, well, they're like, what, maybe a mile square? Doesn't matter. I mean, mile square, that is the most expensive real estate in the entire universe.
Yeah.
So, all right. Having said that, springboarding into round 2.
I was going to talk about the Middle East and how that Hitler and the Nazis really didn't originate the concept of a Muslim alliance with Germany. It really came from World War I. Mm-hmm. And it's from a book called American Dynasty, Aristocracy, Fortune, and the Politics of Deceit in the House of Bush, written by Kevin Phillips. It says, few Americans have realized the extent to which both world wars dripped petroleum concern. Save for the bloody 1942-45 island hopping in the Pacific, we usually picture both world wars in European terms. Peripheries like North Africa were just that, sideshows. Ship convoys were maritime adjuncts. What we have especially neglected is the role of the Middle East and oil in the two wars. Twice the Germans and the Allies pursued both. Important in the first conflict, petroleum became absolutely central between 1939 and 45. 16 years before the Guns of August 1914, the Sultan of Turkey, Abdulhamid II, often called the Damned, received a Secret Service report about clandestine German exploration in what is now Iraq, but then was Ottoman Mesopotamia. The Kaiser's state visit to Constantinople, his grandiose profession of Muslim sympathies, his pursuit of a Turkish alliance, and his dream of a railroad from Berlin to Baghdad had a further dark and seeping motivation. According to British historian Peter Hopkirk, German geologists posing as archaeologists were at the very moment prospecting for oil around Mosul in northern Mesopotamia. In fact, his spies informed him that they had already found it, for an intercepted German report spoke of the region offering even greater opportunities for profit than the rich oil fields of the Caucasus. Those fields had made Russia the Ottoman Empire's great rival, the world's top turn-of-the-century producer. The oil era was just beginning. After war broke out in 1914, the battlefield presence of automobiles, trucks, and aircraft, as well as the British Navy's reliance on oil rather than coal power, made petroleum an even more important war resource. Luckily, large new oil fields in the United States and British development of Persia, together with the Russian production still accounting for 15% of world output, gave the Allies a leg up in dominating petroleum geography. After Germany, despite its advances in coal, iron, and rail transport, failed to win a quick victory advancing into France in 1914, the war moved into the trenches. Motor transport and aircraft use mushroomed, and Germany's lack of oil became perilous. Through 1916, German war managers got some oil from overseas, but relied mainly on supplies from neutral Romania, Europe's second largest producer. Although the Kaiser had completed his railroad from Berlin to Baghdad, commercial oil and gas development was not yet underway in Mesopotamia, despite conspicuous natural gas vents and oil seepage, widely commented upon since the days of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Alas for Berlin, little came of the Turco-German Holy War designed to stir up the 1914-15 Muslim revolution in the Russian Caucasus and against a British authority in Persia and India. Although the Sultan, as Caliph of Islam, proclaimed jihad, no serious rising took place. Turkish troops in the north did little more than mass near the Russian border. In the south, they threatened but did not attack the Anglo-Persian oil refinery in Abadan, just across the border in neutral Persia. The limited success came in 1915 when local tribesmen, agitated by German agents and the Turks, damaged the Anglo-Persian pipeline from the oil fields to Abadan, greatly reducing its flow for 5 months. Ironically, Winston Churchill, as First Lord of the Admiralty in 1914, had despaired of Britain's ability to defend the Persian oil fields and refinery. There is little likelihood of any troops being available for this purpose. We shall have to buy our oil from somewhere else. Each side put a high priority on constricting the other side's oil supply. Germany responded to Britain's naval blockade and control of surface waters with a submarine campaign that decimated British shipping, not the least oil tankers. In early 1917, adoption of unrestricted submarine warfare against Allied shipping doubled the tonnage from a year earlier, reducing the Royal Navy's oil supply to a level that threatened paralysis. On the other side, when neutral Romania joined the Allies in 1916, the Germans responded by capturing the Romanian oil fields around Ploesti, but they were partly thwarted by a group of British destruction teams led by Colonel John Empire Jack Norton Griffith. Given reluctant permission by the Romanian government, they wrecked derricks and pipelines, set the wells ablaze, and left such destruction that production could not be resumed until spring. Sounds like Saddam Hussein.
Mm-hmm.
Output by the Germans for all of 1917 was only one-third that of 1916. After the war, General Ludendorff acknowledged the dire effects. After the Kaiser's Islamic holy war had fizzled, Britain, France, and Russia turned their thoughts to a post-war division of the crumbling Ottoman Empire, as set out in the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916. Russia's post-war sphere of influence would include the Bosporus and part of Anatolia. France would comprise Lebanon, Syria, and oil-rich Mosul. Britain would hold sway in Arabia, Palestine, and most of Mesopotamia, including Baghdad. Sir Maurice Hankey, Secretary of the War Cabinet, explained, "Oil in the next war will occupy the place of coal in the present war. The only big supply we can get under British control is the Persian and Mesopotamian supply. Therefore, control over these supplies becomes a first-class British war aim. Revolution cost Russia its place at the post-war table, so Britain and France alone divided the Middle East pie." Besides guiding a tribal revolt in Arabia, British troops also prevailed in Palestine and Mesopotamia. From a base in Basra near the Persian border between 1915 and 17, they drove up the valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates to seize Baghdad. Some of the same towns and battlefields, Shaiba, Al-Amara, and Nasiriyah, will be revisited in the Anglo-American invasion of Iraq in 2003. One other petroleum-driven campaign took place before the armistice. When revolutionary Russia left the war in 1917, Germans and Turks took aim at the scarcely defended Russian oil fields in Baku, just north of Turkey and Persia. Before German diplomacy could work, a Turkish army put Baku under siege in the summer of 1918. However, a small British relief force arrived, delayed the oil center's capture, and then slipped away. Turkish troops did not take the city until September, too late for desperately needed oil to help Germany